Did you know that Megumi invented a fusion with the 10 Shadows that no other user had ever thought of or done before? And no, I'm not talking about Totalities, I'm talking about the Wells Unknown Abyss. Let's talk about that and some other 10 Shadows stuff today. Alright, first of all, shout out to Mush for inspiring this video today with his 10 Shadows questions, and let's kick things off with the Wells Unknown Abyss. What is this fusion and how does it differ from Totalities? And for anyone who doesn't remember, this is when Megumi combines the frogs with Nue to create these winged frogs, which we actually see him use on a couple of different occasions. Now, this seems a lot like Totality, with one Shikagami inheriting powers from another, but it is completely different because we know that Totalities are used with dead Shikagami, their power infused into others. The Wells Unknown Abyss combines a live Shikagami. Now you might be saying, well wait, if you can fuse Shikagami without the whole Totality thing, why don't we see that way more in the manga? Because we only see Megumi do this one specific fusion of the frogs and Nue, and I think he only does it twice, maybe 3 times throughout the entire series. And the reason is because it's way weaker than the original Shikagami themselves. Now, how much weaker? I don't know. Is there some merit to maybe trying some other Wells Unknown Abyss combinations? Probably. Can you use it to combine any Shikagami, or is it only certain ones? Who knows? Because we really didn't see this explored very much. Now, you might have been like, well wait, you said Megumi invented this. How do we know that? How do we know anything about how this works? Well, like most lore, we have to rip it away from Gege Akutami, and in this case, it was revealed in a supplementary info section that appeared at the end of one of the chapters. And here he's just talking about the 10 Shadows, and you can see here he says extra, 2 plus 4, aka the Toad, and Nue represent the Wells Unknown Abyss, which is something that Megumi made up using the 10 Shadows as a base. So no one else had ever done this before. And he goes on to say it can be destroyed without consequence, but it is very weak. And what he means by destroyed without consequence is that if a Wells Unknown Abyss dies, you don't lose the Shikagami, whereas you would if it was a normal summoning. So it's got that going for it as well. But it must just be so weak that it's not really worth doing in most circumstances. And like we saw, Megumi only used it with the Toad and Nue essentially as an escape option. But he goes on to say that both Shikagami need to be alive for this type of fusion, so you can't do a Wells Unknown Abyss with a Totality even at all. And also, he just goes on to say that there are just separate rules for this versus Totalities. So, Potential Man gets memed on a lot, but the fact that he found a whole new way to fuse Shikagami is pretty impressive. And, you know, if he hadn't have been sidelined for the majority of the manga, it would have been cool to see what else he might have cooked up with the 10 Shadows. But next up, Mush asked me a question about Totalities. He was wondering if you can undo them, or after you infuse one into another, is it permanently like that? So let's look at Megumi's Divine Dog, for example. We know that it originally was a black dog and a white dog. The white dog died, and then later we see that Megumi summons the totality of the white dog infused into the black dog. So is it now forever like this? And the answer is no. Basically, after you desummon a totality, everything goes back to its standard form. And we know this because we've seen Megumi summon just the black dog with no totality infused into it after that moment. Here you can see him doing it at the baseball game, and I got the manga panel too, so it's not anime only or anything. And I think we actually see him do this a couple of times. So assuming you desummon the totality and not that it gets killed, you can summon the subsequent versions again. However, if the totality got killed, then the black dog would be permanently gone as well. Now, you would be able to use the white dog totality and the black dog totality now, but you could never use the original Shikagami that was there. All right, from here on out, all of Mush's questions are extremely spoiler heavy. So just in case we had any anime onlys tapping in, now's your sign to get out. All right, so next up, Mush wanted to know how the SemiShadow Summons work with 10 Shadows, where we saw Sukuna use the Divine Dogs, but he didn't fully manifest them and instead manifested several shadow versions. So how does this work? And I think it's pretty much the same principle as the Wells Unknown Abyss. Not in that it's a fusion, but it's just a different application of the base technique that's way weaker in exchange. So as you can see, he's summoning a bunch of the dogs, whereas there's only one left that's alive right now. So it's just a weaker but different application of the technique. And even though it's weaker than the fully summoned dog, it obviously still has its uses, right? And whether or not Megumi knew he could do this, or if this is a unique application that Sukuna invented, who knows? But essentially it's just, using this technique as a Swiss Army knife. It's got a whole bunch of different things you can do with it. I would assume that this is more along the lines of what we saw Megumi do just with his typical shadow manipulation, where he can store things in it, travel in it. This is just a new application of that. Now, the full extent of what you can do with this, who knows? Because this is the only time we saw it, right? But I would assume you could do it with any of the Shikagami. It's just going to be a weaker form of them. Then next up, Mush asked, to what extent can a 10 Shadows user wield its Shikagami's abilities, like we saw with Sukuna using Max Elephant's water as a piercing blood attack, or how he used Maharaga's Dharma Chakra wheel to adapt for Maharaga. And I can't answer to what extent, but I would assume that the possibilities are essentially limitless. But I would also imagine it probably has to be Shikagami who are still alive. Like, I would doubt you could do this with Max Elephant if Max Elephant was dead, for example. But other than that, I would imagine it's just limited by your jujutsu skill and imagination, right? It took a genius like Sukuna to show us this was possible, but I would imagine that Megumi could theoretically summon Nue's lightning in the same way that Sukuna used Max Elephant's water here, and perhaps many other applications as well. Next, Muse asked me for what I thought the current status of Megumi's Shikagami were, and this is my best guess. We don't have perfect information because we can't know what we don't know, but we know those 5 are for sure dead because Agito had Orochi in it, Round Deer in it, and Morn Tiger, right? So for those to have been Totalities, they must be dead, and we knew that Great Serpent was dead, right? But then Gojo killed Agito, which had Nue at its base, so now Nue is dead, and then obviously Maharaga is dead as well. So I think that he still has those 5 and then can use the other 5 as Totalities. And then Muse also asked me what I thought Funeral Tiger did, and I have no idea. I would also assume that it's just some sort of martial beast given what Agito looked like, but really there's no way to know. Oh, also, this is assuming that Megumi and Sukuna share the same 10 shadows, and I've talked about that a lot in different videos, so I'm not going to get into it here. My best guess is that this is how this works, and they do share shadows, but I did hear the idea about like the save file version of 10 shadows, meaning Sukuna started with what Megumi had, but from there they branched and they have their own. So if that's true, then, Megumi still has a lot of these back. But, really, we're never going to know how that works either unless Gege Akutami comments on it. So, again, for my money, this is Megumi's current stable because he and Sukuna did share the technique, the same version of the technique. Then next up, Muse asked what I thought the giant spine was in the back of Megumi's domain. And this is a great question. I did have a couple of theories about it back in the day, and I think I maybe spoke about it in my 3 Great Vengeful Spirits of Japan video, where we theorize about how maybe the 3 big clans of Jujutsu kind of originated from the 3 vengeful spirits, because we know that at least one of them is connected to the Gojo clan, right? So perhaps the other 2 are connected to the Kamo clan and the Zenin clan, right? And one of them, and I can't remember which one specifically, but as part of the mythology and folklore surrounding one of them, there is like a huge kind of skeleton creature. So I was wondering, like, is this symbolic of that? But Muse specifically asks if I think it is like an 11th indestructible Shikagami that would have been summoned once he fully mastered the domain. And I don't think that necessarily. I think it's called 10 Shadows, so there are probably only 10 Shikagami, but maybe it is some sort of like crazy Omega totality that would have been possible, or perhaps, just summoned because of the completed domain. Or it could just be aesthetic, right? We know everyone's innate domain is kind of brought forth and, there's aesthetic to them that isn't necessarily function. So it could just be that, right? It could just be cool set dressing. So I don't know. And then finally, on the subject of whether or not Megumi could inherit Sukuna's shrine technique, Muse says, wouldn't it make more thematic sense for only Yuji to inherit the technique? And yeah, on a thematic level, like that was the whole point, right? It was obviously building on the parallels between Sukuna and Yuji. So yeah, and JJK's over, so obviously like that was the point. So it's not really about like the thematics or the narrative in this case. It's more just about like the precedent. And we know that Yuji got that technique because he was Sukuna's vessel and his body was soaked in that technique long enough, right? So it's theoretically possible that the same could be true for Megumi. Now, I've talked about this idea at length in multiple different videos, so I don't want to get all into it here. So check those out if you guys are interested for the full breakdown. I know some people think, well, Yuji only got it because he was related to Sukuna, but that's not true because Gojo didn't know that when he said that at the beginning of the series. So thematically, yes, like the entire point was Yuji to get that and to create that mirror and parallel, right? So that's not really there for Megumi unless we want to look at, you know, how Sukuna used both techniques, and now we might get to see how Megumi could use both. But again, JJK's over. That's not happening. So thematically, I agree, but I do still think it's possible. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one, y'all. As always, thank you for watching.